And welcome back. As we go ahead and get started looking at strings and string methods in Python. Now, of course, we're already familiar with creating strings and concatenating them and stuff like that, but let's go ahead and see what else can we do in order to make our programs much more useful and robust. Well, the first thing to recall is that strings are arrays, and they're very similar to how we have treated them in Java. They start at position 0, they're an index of characters, and these characters, of course, are Unicode characters. So again, this is nothing new to us. If we're already familiar with how Java kind of handles strings, it's kind of a similar approach. However, Python does not have a character data type, and therefore a single character is simply just a string with length 1. Very important distinction here. There's no character type, no char type. We just have strings that are going to have a length value 1. Now, square brackets, of course, can be used to access particular elements of the string. So if I want to get a particular position of that string, so if I want, for example, here I'm going to print A of 1 of hello world, that would of course return E, and that's how I would do that. I can just use these square brackets to actually get those actual indexes and their values. Now, let's start looking at things that are going to be useful to us, which first off is the string length. To get the length of string, we simply use the len function. All right, so let's say we have hello world here. I would could just use print the len of A. And so that would, of course, just return the length. Now, what about substrings? What if we wanted to get that kind of information? Well, first off, let's check to see if a word or phrase is present in a string. We can use the word in. So let's just say you have the string that says the best thing in life are free. I can print a check for the word free using the keyword in, and of course, this is text, which of course would be the name of that string. If the string was called, let's say, line, it would be free in line. And that's, of course, just how we check that. Conversely, if we want to see if a string is not present, but we don't have that particular substring, we can use the keywords not in, which is very helpful. So, if it's in the string, use in. If it's not in the string, use not in. So, for example, the best thing in life are free. Print, let's say we're looking for the word expensive. Well, if we're going to say expensive is not in the text file. Now, if you think about what are these actually going to return? Well, they're pretty much going to return a Boolean value. So they're either going to be true or false. So this makes this actually going to be real helpful when we start looking at conditionals and how we got to handle that kind of information. But let's actually take a step back first and look at slicing up strings. All right, so we want to actually get those substrings because those could be useful to us. Well, we can return a substring in several different ways. So let's just assume for our example purposes, we have the string B equals hello world. So if I want the start index and the ending index separated by a colon, we can return a part of the string using, for example, print B colon 25. If I want to leave out the starting index, the range is simply going to start the first character. Print B colon 5. And if we leave out the end index, well, our range is going to go all the way to the end of the string. So B2 colon, and then that's it. And we have a negative index, that means it's going to start the slice from the end of the string. All right. And so just to recap here, this means it's going to go from position 2 to position 5. This one's going to start at the beginning of the string and stop at the 5th index. This one will start at the 2nd index and go all the way to the end of the string. This one's actually going to start at the -5, so the 5th index back here. So we're going to start at the back of the string. So it's still index 5, but it's going to start at the back of the string and work up to index 2. This can be handy when we start looking at traversal things. Now, while we're only showing print statements here in this example, the same techniques that we're looking at could easily be used to store a substring into another variable. So if we wanted to use something similar to how we use our approaches in Java, we can still do that here. Now, let's actually look at some other common string methods, and these are going to be fairly easy for us to recognize. So, for example, we have the very first set of built-in methods is .upper. This simply just returns the string in uppercase. .lower returns that string in lowercase. .strip, which in Java we call this .trim, it's removing any white space from the beginning or the end of a string. .replace is really helpful because it can replace the characters in a string with other characters. So if we want to swap something out, for example. And then lastly, we have split, which can actually split it into substrings if it finds the indicated separator. Now, one thing to note about split is that if you don't use it if you just say .split, and let's say we want to print it out, what's it going to do? It's actually going to return a list of string values. So if you actually want to put it into actual variables, if you want to split it this way instead of using the slicing technique that we looked at earlier, there's a little bit more nuance that goes into it. So a lot of times when we want to simply just get a piece of that string, using the slicing is actually going to be a better approach than using split. Now, there are other methods available, though these methods we have right now are enough to get used to learning with Python. Now, one more thing to talk about before we kind of look at some examples here. Let's look at a couple escape characters. So Python, of course, has its own set of escape characters. There's the single quote, we have backslash, we have new line, character return, tab, backspace. All right, these aren't anything really too different than what we might be used to seeing in Java, which makes it a lot easier when we start saying like, okay, well, what is the escape character sequence here? So again, this is something we're already familiar with. All right, and so here we have a demonstration of our various strings and string methods. So for example, we can see we have the phrase, don't get strung up on the details, and you can see that we even have an extra space snuck in here. And the first thing we're going to do, we want to print out the length of this phrase. Then we're going to convert it to uppercase, print it out again. Then we're going to trim it, which means we're going to use the strip method here to get rid of this extra space here at the end. Then I want to replace the period here with a exclamation point. So we are going to use the replace command. Then we're going to slice out a substring here. And when I slice it out, you can see how we are using this square bracket notation here. And this one is simply saying start at the beginning and stop at position 5. All right, it's one of those many different substring options we have. I'm printing out. And then I have a different one here, which is the split command. And so we have this other thing called old phrase. We said to sneaky ninjas. And we're splitting that to new phrase and second phrase. And you can see it's splitting it based upon the space here. And again, this is a little trickier because we have to rely on the space character. If I have more than one space, it actually is going to throw an error in here and stuff in here. So, or if the character doesn't exist. So it's one thing to kind of keep in mind when we're using split versus if we are using the actual slicing method. But let's just go ahead and take a look at that. So we get 36, which is our length. We get don't strung up on the details with a period. Don't strung up on the details with an exclamation point. We get don't, which of course is just that substring we did. We get sneaky and ninjas because that is the variables here that are splitting out of old phrase. And notice, because this is new phrase, comma, second phrase, what this is effectively doing is taking this and putting it as normally would be a list item and putting it into variables. Because if you actually look at how the implementation of split works, it actually would return it as a list. So we haven't talked about lists yet with Python, but it's just something to keep in mind here of how this is handling it. My recommendation for now is if you want to slice and pull out a substring, use the slicing method here, because again, this way it's going to be better if you want to pull out it into a list, but this way it's much better if you want to use much more we're used to with Java with our substrings.